Welcome back to Free to Pursue. I'm Hélène and I'm bringing you another book review, and this is a sincere privilege to bring you this book review. This book is one of my top 3 all-time favorite books and top recommendations, so it is a real treat to bring you this book review today. And the book I am talking about is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor E. Frankl. Now, this book has been around for decades. Viktor Frankl was a prisoner, an inmate in Nazi concentration camps. He was also a psychologist by training and had been working on a book actually when he was became essentially prisoner of the Nazis during the Second World War. Now, this profession and where he was in his life gave him the tools to both survive and to gain as much as possible from that experience. Let me explain why this book is in my absolute favorite top 3 and why it garners 5 stars. First and foremost, it is a book that really captures the power of human resilience. It's only a few hundred pages long, and I would argue that this book is for everyone. We all want to seek and pursue meaning in our lives, but this book really solidifies why it matters so much for us to do so. The readability of this book is very high. I mean, anytime we are dealing with a story, and the first part of this book is Viktor Frankl's story as a person who has observed, lived the incarceration life and also the life after incarceration and how he benefited from, yes, I said benefited from that experience. The book is a real page turner, and in fact, the author was so compelled to write it, he wrote it in an extremely short amount of time. Though you couldn't tell from the writing, it was very, very well written. I often talk about what I liked in a book, and for this book, I feel like is not a good enough word. I would like to talk to you about what I loved about the book. What I loved about the book was that it made me think, and it moved me so often as I read it. It moved me to tears, it moved me to reminisce, it made me laugh out loud. I ended up feeling the full gamut of emotions as I read. It is a small book, but it packs a very real punch. The book also led to a great deal of reflection. It made me think about how our pursuit of living a meaningful life is being eroded on an increasing basis in the society. It's being eroded by consumerism. It is being eroded by the displacement of work and effort by technology. It is replacing deep, meaningful thinking for immediacy. And so I think that it is becoming increasingly difficult for us to find meaning, to find connection, to find a deep desire, deep passion to pursue what is difficult. It's increasingly difficult for us to do so. In essence, the need to pursue meaning, to go after a purposeful life, is really what the stuff of good life is made up of. But increasingly from marketers, we're getting the opposite suggestion that we should take a load off, we should make life easier, we should take the easy way. Why would you go for the fuss? Why would you make something hard for yourself? And really, at the root of it, it is the wrong message if we want to live well and feel fulfilled. In essence, there is one quote that kind of sums up man's search for meaning really well, and it's a quote from Nietzsche. He who has a why to live can bear almost any how. And that is what the author found when he was in that concentration camp. He has example after example of how the moment someone's purpose, someone's meaning for living was unclear, the person gave up. The person gave up either by seeking a way to get eradicated by the Nazis, to essentially waste away and die, or even to take their own lives. He could see the loss of purpose and meaning in the eyes of the people who were losing their flame, so to speak. He could see it happening right before his eyes. And often there was nothing he could do about it. One of the things that helped Viktor Frankl survive was the fact that he was making all these observations. They were paramount because he was seeing a purpose in himself. There was meaning in his observations. He wanted to publish a book and share with the world the strong realizations he made while incarcerated in one of many camps over a number of years. He wanted to share the observations that he made, what he witnessed over a significant amount of time and within a number of different camps that he was transferred to. This book is a two-parter book. You will find the first part, which is his account of life in the camp and what his observations were. And then part two is how he applied the learning in something he called logotherapy. Now, I would argue that the first part of the book is the only essential reading. In part one, it is part biography and part a recount of his observations, both for what was happening to himself and what he witnessed happening in other people. And this could be starvation, this could be torture, this could be theft, this could be violence towards another person. It could be a number of things. And he also witnessed not only cruelty from the Nazi guards to the prisoners, but he also witnessed cruelty and magnanimity from one prisoner to another, despite the fact that everyone was living the same reality. And he witnesses and recounts the sharp contrast between someone who had meaning in their lives, something to live for beyond the day-to-day, and those who were just surviving moment to moment without looking beyond the current situation they were in, suffering in the moment without anything to pull them away to a future, a bright future, a meaningful future that someone was willing to live for and live through the atrocities they were living in the moment. Now, for those prisoners who had given up, those prisoners who did not have a why, did not have meaning in their lives, their situation often quickly deteriorated. And if they wished for their lives to end, their wish was often quickly granted. And here I will quote Frankl to help you understand how he was viewing the situation when someone was basically giving up. Those who know how close the connection is between the state of mind of a man and the state of immunity of his body will understand that the sudden loss of hope and courage can have a deadly effect. Woe to him who saw no more sense of his life, no aim, no purpose, and therefore no point in carrying on. He was soon lost. Page 75, 76. Now, on the positive side, Viktor Frankl also saw 3 specific traits of those who he found to be the most resilient. And they were as follows. He saw that those who were used to an intellectual life were more resilient. They were able to live in their head, so to speak, but in a good way. They were able to go back to the things that they had learned and experienced and essentially throw themselves forward and see how they could still make use of that ability in the future. In a way, the way he was recounting it in the book made me think of Andy Dufresne in The Shawshank Redemption. Whether you read Shawshank Redemption, the book, or watch the movie, that learning, the past learning, was part of what he was tapping into in that experience to help him deal with the difficulties of the current situation. Well, Viktor Frankl's account of the benefits of the intellectual life is very similar in this book. The next notable characteristic was a sense of humor. Seeing light in even the darkest situations was giving the owner of this sense of humor additional armor, if you will, to weather some very difficult situations. Being able to laugh at ourselves and to laugh at a ridiculous situation, even horrific situation, definitely would add to anyone's resilience. And the third characteristic was a strong sense of self. And I think that that makes sense along with having a strong intellectual self. It does definitely help to define ourselves as an individual. So in his view, the folks who were more likely to be sheeple as opposed to strong, independent individuals were those more likely to succumb to the situation they were in and to have less resilience. This kind of aspect makes me think of the Hunger Games, where in the books and in the movies, you can definitely see a dichotomy between the sheeple and the heroines, or those who overcome their given situation because of that strong sense of self and the belief in their abilities. Now, in part 2, as I mentioned before, you'll see more of the psychologist side of Frankl and his observations about the various clients, patients that he has had a chance to treat during his professional life. And so here in this section, you see him offering observations less from a personal perspective and more from a professional perspective. And to give you a sense of it, I will share a second quote. This quote is from page 106, and it's a little bit of a longer quote, so please bear with me, it's worth listening to. The existential vacuum is a widespread phenomenon of the 20th century. The traditions which buttressed man's behavior are now rapidly diminishing. No instinct tells him what he has to do. No tradition tells him what he ought to do. Sometimes he does not even know what he wishes to do. Instead, he either wishes to do what other people do, conformism, or he does what other people wish him to do, totalitarianism. The existential vacuum manifests itself mainly in a state of boredom. Now, to address this, Frankl has a number of solutions, and they are as follows. We need to stop focusing on our unhappiness because that keeps us there. Instead, we should focus on what it is that we can do, what pursuit we can go after, and stop focusing on the happiness by redirecting it to something more positive. And we need to find meaning in our lives. We need to find meaning in doing things, pursuing things, loving things, getting engaged in things. And sometimes this seeking of purpose means setting meaningful goals for ourselves. And these meaningful goals should be on our terms, not someone else's. He also encourages spin. That anytime, any situation where we experience what could be called tragedy, that we should see if we can spin it into a triumph in some way, shape, or form. People who are effective at that often turn a bad situation into a learning experience. They find a way of benefiting from it as opposed to dwelling on what went wrong. He also suggests that we should not be driven by fear. We should look at an uncertain situation and just see how we can stack the deck in our favor. Again, it takes us from a focus of what we fear to a focus on what we can do to improve our situation. Frankl also suggests that we should empower our ability to transform ourselves, that we should look at our potential as opposed to our limitations and focus on the areas of ourselves that we can control and that we can grow and improve. He stresses that no one's fate is predetermined, that we can definitely have an influence on the outcome. And he also wants us to spin guilt around, that if we feel a sense of guilt, that we should use it as an indication that we should go for personal improvement, personal development, as opposed to adding to the shame we feel about our shortcomings. So that if we sense guilt, that we should take action to help to mitigate or eliminate that guilt and not let it add to what we feel is personal shame for whatever we may have done or whatever personal attribute we might have. I will leave you with one last quote from the book from page 131, and it is as follows. Man is not fully conditioned and determined, but rather determines himself whether he gives in to conditions or stands up to them. In other words, man is ultimately self-determining. So the bottom line is, Frankl saw that the most successful people sought purpose and sought continuous personal development, the striving to be a better version of ourselves and to have a reason to live, a reason to get up in the morning, something that helped us propel us forward, especially when times become hard, was the source of resilience and the secret sauce to surviving the atrocities of the internment camps. Frankl provided compelling evidence that pursuing meaning in our lives and pursuing personal growth were the most likely sources of a good, healthy, and meaningful life. I have a link to Man's Search for Meaning below in the description box, and I also want to make a few other book recommendations if this theme is of interest to you. Here are a few other book recommendations. First up, Drive by Daniel Pink, More Than Money by Mark Albion, and Why We Work by Barry Schwartz. The Way We're Working Isn't Working by Tony Schwartz, and The Pursuit of Happiness by Chris Gardner. And as I mentioned earlier in this review, The Shawshank Redemption is also pretty good. The links for this book and other recommendations you will find in this book review are available down in the description box. Thank you for watching this book review of Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. I hope you found it useful. I appreciate the time you gave me today. If you found the content of this book review useful, please give it a thumbs up. And if you like the content on Free to Pursue in general, please consider subscribing. I would love to have you. Thank you for your time today, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Take care.